Hey everybody, this is Cal and welcome to my RTS gaming channel, where we explore the lore of the game and see how it ties into the universe where it came from. Today we will be looking at Dawn of War and the 3 expansions that came after it. With this game we will look at how its story lines up with the story lore of the Warhammer 40k universe as it is to what it is happening in the game now.
Let's go.
In this section, we are looking at the story of the expansion called the Dark Crusade. In this edition, the expansions, we see the feared Necrons are added to the game for its dark evil theme. Who are the Necrons? They are a former humanoid species who existed around the same time as the old ones. The Necrons have become entombed in their technologies called living metal. The Necrons have lived for over 60 million years and are slowly awakening in what was their space of their former dynasty. By awakening, I mean wars and alien intrusion onto their planets have disturbed the Hornet's Nest. Now the two worlds are coming back to life. The centuries-old hard-coded drive to subjugate all living in their former domain and beyond pushes them forward. Where are we? The planet Cronus, a planet once owned by the Imperium of Man, but was lost to the Tau for the last 200 years. Note, it is not uncommon for worlds once belonging to the Imperium of Man succeeding to Tau control in this universe, for much needed sense of safety from the horrors that exist in the Milky Way galaxy. Let's take a moment to look at this cutscene to get an exact look of Cronus.
The planet Cronus, beset on all sides by the tides of war. This once quiet colony became a savage battlefield. 7 armies clashed on this one world, each refusing to back down. Each convinced it was in the right.
From what I understand, Cronus as a planet does exist, and the main reason we have such interest in this planet are leftover effects and artifacts from the Horus Heresy. This is why Chaos and the Space Marines have interests, even orcs seeking to loot goodies for the wall. The Horus Heresy was a great civil war within the Imperium of Man. It was led by War Master Horus, one of the former Primarchs of the Space Marines. This civil war also marked the coming out of Chaos to the forefront as a force in the universe. Unfortunately, the God Emperor of Man did not feel it prudent to warn his beloved Space Marines of the taint from the warp. Now in the next video, we're going to see what the creative attitudes were held by the developers for their version of their Necrons, and see how that compares to what we see actually from Games Workshop according to their lore and what's considered canon. There's some explanation about who they are, who their gods are, and why they may have appeared in the first place. So let's take a look at that video, and then we're going to compare to see what's right and what's wrong.
The Necrons had lain buried in the sands of Cronus for eons, having retreated there at the end of a great war only hinted at in the histories of ancient races like the Eldar. Long before man even stood upright, the Necrons and their dark gods had retreated to their tomb worlds. But their slumber was not eternal. Eventually their genocidal deities awoke them again, driving them to purge the life that had spread across the galaxy during their sleep. On Cronus, this awakening came when an archaeological team opened a mysterious crypt on the arid Thor Abyss Plateau. Most of the team died, but expedition leader Thomas Maccabee somehow became one of the mysterious Necron pariahs. Seemingly retaining a hint of his personality, he occasionally spoke for the Silent Army as it advanced. The Necron Lord of Cronus, the most ancient and powerful of the deathless creatures on the planet, promptly launched a campaign of extermination. His loathsome god, the Nightbringer, hungered for the deaths of all those on Cronus.
So in the first part, the Great War hinted at by the Eldar would be the War in Heaven. The War in Heaven was the war between the Necrontyr, who became the Necrons, and the Old Ones. Thus, a war essentially started out of jealousy for the long life and prosperity that the Old Ones held over the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr suffered from a debilitatingly short lifespan and weak bodies. The race was very susceptible to many cancers and a weakened immune system. On the other hand, the old ones lived almost forever, it seemed, and had strong reptilian bodies. This was the focus of much jealousy for the Necrontyr, especially since on many occasions political envoys had tried to barter for technology, to return with failure each time. Now, the next part makes no sense. The Necrons and their dark gods retreated to their tomb worlds, end quote. The Necrons did do this, however, they did not do so with their quote unquote dark gods, because they shattered the Satan, i.e., the dark gods. The reason why the Necrons were able to beat the Old Ones was because of an alliance between them and the Satan, known as the Star Gods. They shared a common enemy, the Old Ones. The sad fact is, the Star Gods were betrayed themselves by their new allies, because the whole time the Silent King, which was the de facto ruler of the Necrons, had been planning and waiting to strike. Once the Old Ones were obliterated, the Star Gods were themselves weakened, and the Necrons, strengthened by being encased in living metal, shattered the gods into many shards. These shards were scattered across the universe, thus there was not much to say between of a love loss of them and their gods. The Silent King then decided that their victory was great enough, and the new seeded races of orcs and elders would have their time and go like all flesh. This conclusion led him to place his people to sleep for 60 million years. Now we come back to the Nightbringer, one of the quote-unquote gods of the Necron, or the god influencing this campaign. Now this wouldn't make sense since after the destruction of the Satan, they were basically broken into shards, and each of these pieces of shards are basically minor forms of each Satan god from which they originally came from. So let's say there's about 100 shards for each god, so that means that's 100 fractured instances of the Night Lord that the Necrons have in their possession. They deploy these shards like weapons of mass destruction, essentially, because of how powerful they are. Now, the Nightbringer shard is the most dangerous of all the shards, a truly last of the last ultimate resort weapon to use, because it's very hard to control. Even under the control through the Tesseract Labyrinth, which is what they use to maintain their hold over the shards, it's rumored that at some points, at some level, these shards still retain the understanding and the memory of the betrayal of the Necrons. So essentially, it wouldn't make any sense that the motivation for the Necrons doing what they do is coming from the Satan, because they're essentially all destroyed to our knowledge. The Nightbringer being the oldest and possibly the first of the Satan to come into existence, he was, or it was destroyed during, the war, or I should say after the war in heaven, when they were in their weakened state. And their shards were broken up amongst the minor factions of the Necrons, so there's multiple instances of, the Nightbringer that could be deployed for those, truly disaster-type zero-sum situations. So again, it wouldn't make sense that the god is controlling these Necrons or urging them to do anything, because it essentially can't. So basically, the motivations for the Necrons ultimately come from the fact that they've been awakened, they've been disturbed. Like in the video, we have the archaeological team that disturbed their tomb, and that's one of the use case scenarios for an early awakening of a tomb world. Large-scale wars, explosions, mining operation, all these things, and exploration through archaeological means. These are how we stumble upon these tomb worlds and awaken them. Now, essentially, they all are on a 60 million year timer, so to speak, sleep timer, if you will. But of course, things happen, technology falls into disrepair, these stasis chambers malfunction, maybe their clocks get off, so that's why not everyone awakens at once. So it's mostly through these disruptions of the environment of the planet they're on. As far as their motivations, they're really looking to recover what was the vastness of their grand universal dynasty as a race. So basically, once they've been awakened, they're looking to take back what was theirs, because it was, millions of years ago, it was theirs. And they see themselves as greater than the flesh that exists, so they're going to destroy it and ruin it and take it over. One final note I want to make, the last point in that video, we had the pariahs that was mentioned, the archaeologist that became a pariah. Now, from what I understand, this is somewhat still kind of canon, although Necrons don't really make other Necrons. They had to be Necrontyr first from the original civilization that transposed their mental consciousness to the living metal Necron bodies. So they're not like the Borg or something that assimilates a group and then turns them into that, unless they have big factories that make Necrons. Whatever Necrons there are, that's a finite population. So these pariahs, from what I understand, are still canon. So essentially, they're basically like trader individuals who trade for knowledge of their race and maybe tactical advantages for the hopes of becoming put in this living metal and getting some kind of amount of immortality. But really, these pariahs are few and small between, so it really just depends on the Necron Lord and how he's feeling that day when he encounters this individual or this trader. Now, what I've kind of done is a slightly abridged version of the events in 40k in regards to the Necrons, the War in Heaven, the Old Ones, and how that all comes into play, just to kind of better frame what's happening in this particular expansion for Warhammer 40k, because it gives you a greater appreciation when you understand the lore and everything that's behind it. You got to understand that for selling a product, they may have simplified that information, especially since it would have been a new concept to a lot of people. Now, I personally think that's a mistake in some cases, but then again, this comes from a little bit in the early 2000s. So I think moving forward, I think a lot of developers are seeing that people are kind of at a better state where they can kind of interpret more advanced forms of kind of lore. We see like the Fallouts type games. But again, they're trying to make a profit, so they're trying to scare off people by making it intimidating. So I think that might have been what could have motivated them to have this interpretation of the game itself. In fact, a really cool game mechanic could have been securing certain provinces on the game map for the Necrons that allowed them to put together 2 or 3 shards or something, and then thus you would have access to the Nightbringer, and it would be significantly powerful. And perhaps 3 of these territories could have been in the much more powerful factions' reign of control and under a heavier fortification. Like 1 shard could have been on the Space Marines' starting location or something to that effect. So again, when you stay true to the lore, you can get a lot cooler gaming concepts, in my opinion. But again, I'm not really bashing this game. That's kind of not why I'm doing this video. I'm really doing it just, again, to better frame what's happening in the universe, in the lore, so you gain a really good appreciation for what's happening. I think this is a great game. I had a lot of fun playing it with my friends, and in single player. It's a really cool story, and it's a very engrossing, living, fictional world that I think once you get a chance to understand it, and you probably understand where the race comes into play and how the world comes into play, it really frames it really well, and you get a greater appreciation, and it becomes more fun. So that's what these videos are all about, in case this is the first time you're watching this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Again, my name is Cal, and I'll see you guys again for the next one. Please like and subscribe, and just remember, I'll be doing this for all RTS series, just to give you guys a better idea of what's happening in their various universes.